Reality is that the cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power.
I, for one, believe in inclusion. I believe in inclusion of all races. I believe in inclusion of men and women in the creation of this thing we call film. Cinema is super powerful in terms of what it can do and how we document history. One of the challenges that I have with inclusion and with the world that we live in today, especially in cinema, is how studios and those in power have become lazy. Lazy in the sense of the need and desire of creating characters and stories that tell the times that we live in. If you're going to make a movie called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and you take away the seven dwarfs and turn Snow White into Snow Hispanic, we got issues, right? You are doing this because you want to get a reaction from the people, and the people have spoken. People are mad. People are crazy. All these races pop up from everywhere. You antagonize them into becoming who they are. You knew what the reaction was going to be. Kudos to Disney for that. They've done it multiple times. And hey, a lot of times I've found myself being a black person having to defend my black sisters or black brothers when they're given these roles, being like, hey, good for a brother, good for a sister. They get paid. At least one of us makes some money. Hoorah, hoorah, hoorah. I didn't care about Snow White. I didn't care who was cast to be in it. Hey, good for them, man. It's art. But the one thing that I do care about is the story. The moment you start switching stories and you start changing things that we grew up understanding, I have issues with. So Snow White, they say, was made 85 years ago and depicted the times of 85 years ago. Now we're 85 years later. They're making a live action of the animation and they're going to change the entire story. If I remember well, the whole concept of Snow White was she got drugged or some weird stuff and then the prince comes and kisses her and that's how she gets her life. She's a damsel in distress, which I'm assuming the person who thought of Snow White when they were writing it was trying to send a message and was trying to write how they felt. So if you're going to turn their idea into a movie, you might as well do as they intended. Failure to do so is just disrespectful. Or if you want to create your own Snow White, hey, how about just creating an entire different movie with an entire different premise that is based and inspired by Snow White? Don't call it Snow White. Create your own Snow Brown, Snow Green, Snow Red. Hey, don't even call it snow. You can create a rain brown, rain brown. That sounds good. Windy, whatever. Come up with something whereby the main lady is not saved by a prince and deviates from the real story. Oh no, we want to touch into that IP because we know no one will be interested in our storytelling because it's not realistic what we are trying to say to the people is what I get and I understand. And hey, kudos to Disney. You know what? I've been seeing the strikes. I've been seeing everything that everybody is fighting for. The businesses are not making money. People are not interested in going to movies. Maybe the problem isn't necessarily that your cast and crew need to be paid. The problem is your decision making is stupid. Right. Now, why am I mad? Let's listen to this.
Reality is that the cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power and what a woman is fit for in the world. And so when we came to reimagining the actual role of Snow White, it became about the fairest of them all, meaning who is the most just and who can become a fantastic leader. And the reality is, Snow White has to learn a lot of lessons about coming into her own power before she can come into power over a kingdom.
Also, the fact that she's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's the proactive one, and she's the one who set the terms, is what makes it so relevant to where we are today.
Messages like this, man, they send me. They're confusing. One, they sound stupid, in my own opinion, intellectually. Like, I feel it's an ignorant statement to just say, like, oh, Snow White has to learn about being in the role of power and what we've learned over the years of what a woman can do. There's a lot of insecurities that are bred by certain women, depending on the culture and where you grew up. When you limit yourself based on what you're educated upon, it doesn't mean that's how the world is. that doesn't mean that's the reality of it. I remember watching Snow White growing up, and when the question would be asked, who's the fairest of them all? Granted, it was about beauty and how when someone else more beautiful came along, it was Snow White. And then the queen would get mad and being like, what? And now when you're like, oh, who's the most just of them all? Then you're taking away from the story. That's not what the story is. If you have a story, dear Rachel, that you are trying to tell the world, I would appreciate it if you don't reimagine someone's story, you create your own, and then we can watch it or not. Because right now, I'm under the camp that I'm not going to be watching this movie because from what this conversation has done, it feels like it's not an experience that I personally want to go watch or want to expose my children to, because it just feels as if it's an attack on a thesis of an idea. You guys took away the seven dwarfs. You guys took away a lot of things that make the story powerful and created something that sounds and will look shameful. And I feel sorry for Disney because this is the person who you have to market with, and these two people will have to promote your movie and have to sell it. And I feel like you've already removed a section of your audience before we've even gone anywhere. There's no excitement. It's not like you're looking forward to the live reimagining of Snow White. Like, there's been a lot of Snow White movies done over the years, which were very enjoyable. I remember watching Snow White with Christian Stewart. Like, those are movies you remember, man. Those are things that live with you. Those are when you're like, oh, did you watch Snow White? I don't think this one is gonna do well. I'm here to see it. I'm here to be proven wrong. I think that, for someone who has a young career, I feel like she's probably going to tarnish her own image, and we'll see what happens. I mean, she has Hunger Games coming out. If her interviews keep going down this path, I feel like we're going to have a problem. And I don't mean this isn't to say, hey, we should silence women. Women should not be allowed to have power. But I think there's a lot of misconception and miscommunication in the sense of what's actually happening. Reality. We live in a real world. Movies, the purpose of a movie is to capture what we are doing in the meantime in society. So if you were to watch a movie from 2023 in 2080, you should be able to know what was happening at this time period. If you just have a movie that takes a movie that was wrote 85 years ago, just because you think right now what's happening is how realistic of a world are we living in? We don't need men. We live in a world where men are not needed. Let's try it. Let's put all men and send us to Mars and let's see what happens, right? Or let's take women and put them in these spaceships and send them to Mars and see what happens, if this is the message that these people want to send. And one of the sad things that you realize when you start searching up a lot of these women who speak like this, like Gal Gadot, you realize these people are married. These people have live happy lives with their husbands, and they go home to these patriarchal societies. And when they come out, the message that they spread is not the same message that they live by, which destroys a lot of young women. This woman that she's speaking to, Rachel, is 22, and Gal Gadot, how old is she? And what type of messaging is she putting in these people? I think that, whilst women do not need men to save them, I think there is room of understanding of what a man can do and how partnerships work. It's not that in Snow White's story, Snow White needed the prince to come and save her, but that's what the story required in order for the plot lines to be met. That's what the writer wanted to write a story about and share the thematics that they were trying to send of that time. If in 2023 you feel you have a different story to tell, then do tell your own story. Don't go switching another person's story to meet your own agenda, because that's just laziness.